Hi, my name's Chuck Fall. I'm with the Green Liberty Caucus, and tonight we're having a roundtable discussion that's sponsored by the Center for Truth Politics. The director, Emanuel Pastreich, is our host. So I'm going to go directly to Emanuel and have you orient us towards our evening and the topic question. Emanuel, please introduce yourself and explain your Center for Truth Politics and what the purpose of the evening is.
Well, thank you very much, Chuck. And it's a great honor to have an excellent group of people here, small but central in the discussion about American politics and, more importantly, American culture today. And the topic for this discussion at Center for Truth Politics is elections. And to some degree, you might say our addiction to elections. Uh, we want to talk a little bit about elections in the context of the recent election in New York City of Zohar Mamdani as mayor and the consequential excitement about it, and also disappointment by many people at his appointment of a whole slew of corporate Democrats to run his administration, and his silence on many of the serious threats actually still facing us in America and around the world, from technocracy, destruction of the environment, and a whole bunch of other assaults. So it leads us to ask ourselves, honestly, have we made real progress here? Obviously, people are getting mad, but still so much is off the table for political debate. And the essential questions: who controls the means of production, distribution, sales? Who dominates resources, access to energy, money, creation of money, control of information? These still are not the central topic in American politics. And actually, I listened to Mamdani's victory speech. It was very beautifully put. I appreciated that he mentioned Eugene Debs, but he was silent on so many topics that are really critical. Is it a ploy to mask what's taking place, or is it a sort of fundamental shift that's taking place? Many people around me, for example, are concerned about this use of hunger, right, for political control, concerned that somehow this shutdown of the federal government is being promoted as a temporary battle between Democrats and Republicans, when it is, in fact, a permanent shutdown, a permanent destruction of the federal government, an effort that these progressive moves by some Democrats may mask the total takeover of everything. And we can have a situation in which New York City becomes a bit more democratic, a little bit more open, more multicultural, more politically tolerant. But southern states in the United States are being run as military dictatorships. The military industrial complex, the prison industrial complex are not being shut down, not even being addressed. And so the real concern that we have is the focus on elections as the thing that we have to work on, to raise money for, promote. Is that really what it's about in politics? Or are elections themselves not the essential issue? I.e., if we have an organized groups, even if we have a radical administration run by corporate types, if there's enough pressure from below, if we're well organized enough, we can force them to change their agenda. And by contrast, if we compromise from the beginning that we're not going to be in a position, and if I became president tomorrow and the landscape in Washington, D.C. is unchanged, then I might as well be Trump or Obama, because I'm going to be in a cage. The White House would be a maximum security prison. So I guess that's the essential question here: is our elections really what it's about? And how should we go? How should we look at elections, and what should we do going forward?
So since this is a Green Liberty themed event or sponsored by Center for Truth Politics, may I go first? And I'll try to
Sure.
be brief here, but I just want to articulate kind of my quick response, and our movement needs to work simultaneously on many things, and the electoral campaign functions at minimum as bully pulpit to speak to the issues. Now, if running a campaign is used for the purpose of building movement and the messaging, the rhetoric, articulated to better society, I think that's definitely worthwhile doing, because you can purchase in the voter pamphlet $1,000, but you'll reach everyone in the state if you run for U.S. Senate. So Green Liberty Caucus advances the idea of the Liberation Coalition. That while I personally have my, philosophy in politics, I think there's a general consensus for an egalitarian society that's not dominated by a plutocracy, however that gets framed out and explained and considered. And I think there's, as a Green, I have to be very strong on ecology. And so, in short, there is a place for electoral politics relative to building a movement. What is the movement? Is it a Democratic Socialist of America movement? Is that what we're talking about? Is that the future? Just pull out some more Bernie-crats and put them together. Is that what the Mamdani was? And the skepticism, and I don't think it's cynicism to acknowledge that Mamdani is mayor because millions were spent on getting him there.
Right.
But for the billionaire class, he wouldn't be there. Is he still an exciting figure? For sure. And so, I guess I'm kind of uh, inclined to say we should play the field broadly, and be clear and intentional about how we do these things, but understand that if we don't have a movement that, in my, essentially condemns the plutocracy, because they have just spoiled the planet. I mean, I'll close with this. My argument is that, Eisenhower warned the nation, Kennedy heeded it and got Rachel Carson in 1962 said, "Hey, everybody, toxins are poisonous to plants, probably better to avoid." All that hope and possibility has been annihilated through assassinations and state crimes, and leading us towards our emerging techno-totalitarian program. I think that's not hyperbole given the mandates under the COVID and so on. So movement building, electoral politics as bully pulpit play, as political theater from our movement to get out in front of people, build and talk is absolutely, I think, something that we need to pay close attention to and consider, and do trainings around. Hugh Esco is expert at. Even though, this is his specialty, is getting people psyched and ready to run for office. But then, what are you running for? What's the better society look like? That's an important piece of this too. Okay, so I'm going to pass to whomever wants to go next.
Maybe Shane, if
Okay.
Sure. Man, watching this, it has never been more clear that some people don't need to know a whole lot about a candidate. They just need to know how disgusted they are with the status quo at the time. And like, how important are elections? I think the smaller they are, the more local you get, the more impact, the more actual meaning and validity your personal vote actually has. You have some say in the matter. I think the more expansive you get, the more it gets towards a national stage. The more the candidates were offered are not a grassroots product, but just because it takes so money to run a campaign on that scale. There are the donors and the private interests are going to direct the funds to candidates that are willing to echo the message that are in the interest of the financial backers. And kind of what we were discussing earlier, or I think by email, lots of people talk about how Democrats and Republicans are two kinds of the same coin, and they go, well, the system is broken, and it's kind of like a cliche term, and nobody really explains what specifically they mean by that. Everyone kind of has a general sense, but if you press them, can you really, define that for us? They have a hard time doing it. And what I've pinpointed is that Democrats and Republicans, the conservatives, progressives, left, right, however you want to frame it, that dichotomy there, they seem to both be protecting the financial interests of the capitalist, the private ownership, that you call them the elite, the one percenters, Wall Street, whatever it is. They just go about it by two different means. And it appeals to human psychology. There was a study that came out several years ago, and it was a personality test that could predict with 86% accuracy what your political affiliation would be just based on your personality type, your temperament. They didn't ask any political questions. And so there's something that's kind of innately built into us that directs whether we gravitate to the left or to the right. And so our two political parties kind of capitalize on these two personality types, whether you're the bleeding heart liberal or the pick yourself up by your own bootstraps individualist. And they cater to both of those, offering each of those an option. You can choose the Democrats or you can choose the Republicans, but each one is to protect the financial interests. And they do it in ways, the Republican version is, look, we have to give tax breaks to these guys and then trickle down economics. It'll benefit you eventually, but we have to take care of the rich ones first. And so that's how the elite, the capitalist, the big money people, that's how their interests are protected. And the Democrats, they want to do all these social programs that cost money, and they don't ever suggest that the corporations pay for it. They suggest that the government pay for it.
Right.
And which is diverting attention, because a lot of the problems is the amount of wage confiscation that corporations take from people who wouldn't need government assistance if they were given more of a fair share of the value that they generate. So the Democrats are going, here, let the government handle it. That protects the corporations. And the Republicans are going, let's take care of the corporations so it will trickle down to you. And so it's corporate protectionism on both sides. And it just depends sort of on your personality type, which one you gravitate to, but it's both, that's the two sides of the same coin.
Can I just make a quick observation that in Oregon, one of the biggest contingents of voter is the non-party affiliated, which could show disillusionment and with even a skepticism about the two major parties just in general.
But you guys are way more enlightened up there than we are here in the Middle Tennessee.
Well, no, it would be interesting to look at your own I mean, do you know in Tennessee, is it mostly Republican, some Democrat? What's the non-party affiliated numbers? Do you know?
Statewide, it's heavier red.
Yeah.
Nashville and Memphis are blue cities. I'm not sure what Knoxville's makeup is, but we're way redder. I don't know what the independent
But
breakdown
I'll
is.
bet you the independent, non-affiliated, well, it might, who knows? And just for the record, all the local races, where there's actually, for our purposes of movement building, are the ones that we need to, well, we could talk about a tactical play for U.S. Senate, which gives you maximal attention, and for the more practical, really accomplishing something, working at the local levels, school boards, in that practical building a movement, getting people. But then for that purpose, we need to get clear on what is our message? But again, that message is going to be catered to the local area. You're going to sing to the choir in some respects. So it's very nuanced, all of this elections and running. But okay, I've said enough. Should we go to the next,
Yep.
Mark Rollison?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm not going to be as cynical about this, but and for one, I do think that even though, movements are very important and people should be engaged in politics and protests throughout the year, elections are actually very, very important. And on a state level and a local level, I think they're actually fairly effective. It's where they become less effective and they represent more the oligarchs is on the national, the federal level with the Senate race and the presidential race. It's where things get very jaded. But as far as Mandani, and I spent a bit of time looking into Mandani over the past few days. He immigrated to this country from Uganda at age 7. His father was a professor, I believe, that wrote a book called Good Muslim, Bad Muslim about around the time of the 9/11 or after 9/11. Mandani, has been very active in college. He founded the chapter at that school of the Students for Justice in Palestine, and he's been very active in the movement of Palestinian rights. In fact, he was in the New York State Assembly. I think he was with the 36th district, I believe. And he fought for a lot of things, including stopping money that was going to the settlements in the West Bank. He had a bill on that, not one dime for the settlements. I believe it was titled something around on that lines. And then he also fought for, housing, fair housing, et cetera, when he was. So I think he's actually, in many ways, a fairly honest person. Now, I'm not going to say that he's not going to be jaded by the system, and he's under a lot of pressure. Obviously, he's compromised. You can say that he met with Alex Soros, who, is a billionaire, and certainly has you can say a lot of bad things about George Soros, but I guess George Soros actually did give money to Palestinian causes and Palestinian rights struggles. But what Mandani has really done, I think, is that no politician in both parties has really had the courage to do. I guess you could say Marjorie Taylor Greene recently has, because she's finally calling what's going on in Gaza genocide. Mandani has stood up in a way to the Israeli lobby, and they are just shitting their pants. I mean, I don't know. That's why I have this shirt on tonight, because I'm very happy to see the meltdown from the ADL and the Jewish Action Committee. And a lot of these people are talking about leaving the city. And I'm sure that, there are some just awful people in the Zionist movement. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Beitar. I don't want to get too far afield, but they're in New York, and they're very aggressive towards Palestinian protests. And then you can look at the New York police. The NYPD has an office in Israel, and they're trained by the IDF. So my hope is that Mandani, even though he may not be able to do much of what he's saying, is at least he's taken a step in the right direction, and he's representing a shift in politics, because people are so angry at the system that probably even a lot of billionaires realize that they're going to have to, they're going to have to give up something if they're going to hang on to most of their wealth, because people are, and this was true back in FDR's time, there's going to be a revolution if they don't give up something. And
right.
So I think at some point, we have to look at electoral politics as once you no longer have elections, you no longer have a democracy. And that ultimately is what I think Trump is shooting for. But Trump is now kind of in the doghouse. I guess the Democrats won in New Jersey, and the things are not going to go well for Trump, I don't think, in 2026. But he's got a lot of time to do a lot of damage, and he's essentially a fascist. And I think he's trying to become a dictator, and he's trying to get us into a war with Venezuela. So I think he has a lot of time that he can do a lot of damage. And Mandani, of course, is doing the typical politician thing where he's walking a tightrope line and he's trying to not piss off too many people. He's trying to walk a very middle of the road line on a lot of issues. But I think it's more that there's a groundswell now that's moving in this direction, and the way that I see elections having to change. And in 2024, there was almost more than 1/3 of the people didn't vote, and if they had given their vote to a third party, just imagine what they could have done. And this is how do we actually move away from the two-party system with a third party? And I think the way to do it, one of the ways to do it, is you have to have a system that allows for a multi-party vote where people can ranked choice voting is something the Green Party's proposed, but I don't think it's as good as star voting, which you star the candidate, and that would allow for a system where you rank the candidate from 0 to 5, you give them a score. So you can give two candidates the same score if you want. You can give a candidate a 0, so you don't give them any score. And it's a little, actually, it's a more fair, easier to use system, I think, than ranked choice. But if we continue this choose one kind of politics, we're going to go down this road of having the two major parties control everything, and we're not going to change. And it's going to be a back and forth, and that the Democrats do enough bad stuff that the Republicans get back in, and vice versa.
Well, I think we saw this last election cycle, to your point, Mark, just with some of the smaller Democrat candidates, I think like Cenk Uygur and Marianne Williamson that were running, they couldn't get on. They couldn't have a debate anywhere. And again, the problem is, you've got to be visible. People have to see you to hear you. If you've got great points, it doesn't matter if you can't reach anyone. And the way to do that is national media. And because national media, for the most part, is corporate, they're making decisions about, we'll platform these two people because no matter who it is that gets in, we don't care as long as it's somebody protecting corporate interest. We're not going to let in a person who won't take PAC money or who will disclose all of their donors, or who is with a third party. We're just not going to give them that platform. It's kind of the magician's choice, where you have the illusion of making a free choice, but you're being directed what to
right.
I guess what would you see as the solution to get somebody like the Green?
Well, when in this last election, Jill Stein actually got a lot of coverage, and a lot of it wasn't very positive coverage. It was, Newsweek was criticizing her for being a spoiler, and the Democratic Party was their strategy was to keep the Green Party and independents like Robert F. Kennedy and Cornel West off the ballot. But so she got a lot of media coverage because they contested the Nevada decision, which was to take the Green Party off the ballot. They took that to the Supreme Court. So it actually did make a lot of headlines. So it's kind of surprised me. And plus she was at the forefront of these anti-genocide protests and around the country, and she was arrested alongside, was it Washington University students in St. Louis, Missouri, with the cops coming up and shoving their bikes into everybody. And it's a brutal arrest. And she got coverage for that. So I thought, well, she's actually getting publicity. But I think the fact that it didn't matter, because some people don't follow politics that closely to actually see a lot of that news. And then even in the corporate media, they don't follow it that closely. And then the second thing is the people that do, they're so scared about Trump, for example, or the other side is scared about Kamala, that they're not going to vote for a third party. So and even though there was a debate, there was a free and equal debate on, between the Greens, the Libertarians, and the Socialist Party as well. So I don't know. I mean, I think that the media is a big part of the problem. Is they don't give equal coverage, and I think having a system that's based on money. We got to be moving to a public campaign financing versus having.
Can I interject here and
Sure.
then and flip this over to Emanuel to have him kind of reflect on what he's heard? But to me, there's two kinds of discussions. There's, do I, as an individual passionate for a cause, want to run for office, right?
Mhm.
And then and if you're from our group, you're not gonna, you're gonna need 5,000 people to give you $20 to get going. And so talking about, I mean, I think there's two levels of this. There's, what is our movement? How do we articulate our movement so that anybody who would want to run for office would have a movement behind them? And then that's the grassroots, the dissemination of, hey, this guy's interesting, and the viral feed is how this media would spread. Is how I'm assuming this has to work. So maybe so Emanuel, am I onto something to draw the distinction between being an individual, trying to use electoral run for a bully pulpit, and then the secondary kind of like, but then what's this all about? You catch my grappling here? Okay, so
Well, I mean, we've been working together for some time on exactly this issue. Uh, I guess I want to just say that I'm a little bit less optimistic than Mark, that I think various um, Rubicons have been crossed over the last couple decades, but especially the last year, and that it's not a back and forth between the Republican Democratic Party. That large swaths of the United States, it's really not possible to vote for anything but a Republican. The whole balloting system is being skewed. There's efforts of the Republican Party to introduce these monitors to essentially make it impossible to vote. And the media issue, the effort specifically by Larry Ellison and his son David Ellison, Oracle, combining their efforts now with Microsoft and others to essentially take over media in the United States, replace everybody with talking heads, pro-Israel factions. It really is psychological warfare, information warfare. And that I just I don't see any way you can get out of that just by winning in the next election. And some people have been very pessimistic, saying there's not going to be a midterm election, or it's going to be so fraudulent and unrepresentative that it's no longer meaningful. And I don't want to rain in everyone's parade. And I certainly think elections can be meaningful. I guess I would draw the analogy to what happened in France between 1935 and 1945, right? That you had this breakdown of the electoral system, the rise of fascistic elements, the entire system fell apart and ended up with France being split up and occupied, and Vichy pro-fascist forces were in charge. And then the election was after the Germans withdrew. You went back to elections, and they were relatively meaningful. So the efforts made in the electoral system before the collapse and after Bloom were meaningful, and they were able to go back to that. But there was this period in which there was no elections going forward, in which if you weren't, taking the fascist line, anti-socialist line, you didn't exist in France. And that was true in Germany during the First World War as well. We know what happened with Rosa Luxemburg and the decision to leave the Social Democrats when the Social Democrats backed war spending in 1914, and I mean it was serious. I mean that was you couldn't go back to balance easily. And in the case of Germany, The war ended in Germany when you had essentially a revolutionary movement, right? Under Spartacus League and the large parts of the Navy originally in Germany saying we can't tolerate this totalitarian military government. We're going to resist it. And that was some serious politics. That was not about elections. So Germany went back to elections after the war, in the 1920s. But at the moment of crisis, there was no way out. Once the Social Democrats voted for the increase in the war budget and things spun out of control in Germany, there was no way back to normal politics through elections.
Okay, so let's kind of then accept that what Emanuel is saying is, I mean, I don't think you would dismiss using an electoral run.
Absolutely.
Debatable
As you know,
pulpit.
I think it's a great way to work it.
Oh, that's
I
great. So
think
you've
we have
done
to
that.
be
You've
realistic
done that.
about these guys. I mean, it's as I put in that in the militant democracy, right, by Lowenstein's writing. His most important point, I think, is he said fascism is not an ideology. Fascism is a technique, and it's a technique for how you take over a system. And the Lowenstein's position, which I feel sympathetic with, although I don't want to embrace it and say, I follow this idea, this idea. But basically, what Lowenstein was saying is, if you grant fascist elements, militarized corporate political units, the same rights that you grant to, Amnesty International or other organizations or citizens groups, that this is a mistake because they're not playing by the same rules, and their purpose is to destroy governance and democracy.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So let's simply allow that running elections from the organizational point is a huge task. And if anybody were to do it, you would want to have, well, you could do it two ways. You could do it for pure bully pulpit, which you've done, Emanuel, in your run for US president. And you did that in order to essentially alert the nation. Now, it could also be done for a community group in a city. The city of Portland now is governed by a 12-member council, and it functions as a republic. And there was a New York Times article that said that what Mamdani is bringing into New York City has already been done in Portland on account of their ranked choice voting system. There's 4 districts, 3 candidates, 3 reps from each district, and they're voted on through a ranked choice voting system. You can get onto the city council by you don't need more. The minimum is 25% of the votes that would choose you. So there's all these parliamentary nuance that says if you don't get 51% majority or 50 plus majority, you don't get to be on. But so the way that Portland is configured, minority perspectives can still gain voice. Now, it's still hard as hell to run, but within the city of Portland and cities across this country and even somewhat the counties, there are opportunities for individuals to become engaged civically. And I think our movement needs to acknowledge that there is that the exercise of running for office and engaging has to happen for the movement to grow. So people will need to step up and kind of do this. But meanwhile, the movement needs to grow, and we need to be having discussions like we're having right now and talk about the demands that we make and what we ask for and how we engage to get these things and make these requests, as simple as take your 2-minute window at the public hearing at the city council meeting, your free speech right, and say, hey, here's a resolution. We oppose the Gaza, the militarism in our society, and would you pass a resolution that says that, and bum, 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 bum. And now we've introduced into the political discourse these ideas. So this is how I'm kind of contemplating this. Okay, so others.
I just wanted to add, obviously agree with Chuck's vision for what needs to go forward, but I want to add on the issue of journalism, which sort of is died, mainstream journalism, even the progressive journalism. But I really, the work by Shane, by Ethan, by Anthony, who's not here today, also, and others, is very, I think it's a critical part of this process, and it's extremely valuable because we're starting to get something closer to a journalistic medium that can replace the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. Because the problem has been you have these sort of either conspiracy theory or progressive or alternative media, and it's tended to be sensationalist, sort of complainist, but it doesn't offer you a full range of information about how the nation works or your local economy works that would allow you to get rid of New York Times, right? They can replace it because most of the reporting tends to be just focused on one or two or three. It's like Palestine, Trump, 3 or 4 things, but it doesn't really tell you what's actually happening. So I just wanted to say that one of the really inspiring recent developments has been people like Shane and Ethan and Anthony actually starting to get sort of a broader range of full spectrum journalistic information for the public.
Well, since you mentioned us, let me fill you in on one of the recent challenges that I've actually had a discussion with several independent journalists, corporate journalists. When I got into Substack, which was right around the end of January, beginning of March, the audience exploded almost overnight. I mean, it went viral. And then what we saw happen was that the growth slowed exponentially and then kind of tapered off. And then we all began losing audience, and we were trying to figure out why it was.
Right.
And it seemed like with the deplatforming of a whole lot of the corporate media types, and it was everyone from Chris Cuomo to Don Lemon, Mehdi Hassan, Joy Reid, just all these people who had been kicked off their CNN, MSNBC shows. They had a huge built-in audience and took it with them without their contract up and them looking for basically an alternative income. It was creating, podcasts for Spotify, doing the YouTube podcast circuits, but the subscription-based thing over on Substack has, as of the last 3 to 6 months, kind of been taken over by former corporate media types who are advertising themselves as independent media or independent journalism, who are basically platforming the same kind of messaging that they were using in their time slots on their respective corporate network. And you will get a minimal amount of, if they're doing the podcast thing, you'll get some outside perspective that maybe you wouldn't have heard on cable news. But because it's the subscription model over there, you've got a limited amount of people that you can divert your funds to, even if it's, a couple bucks a month or, a couple dozen dollars for the year, whatever. There's only so much that any one person can budget for all the different voices that they're trying to hear. And so now all those ex-corporate types are eating up the space of the independent, really, really, truly independent, smaller journalists.
Well, let me interject. Robert Reich has retired from the New York Times, or no? Oh no, it's not Robert. It's Paul Krugman. No, it's Robert Reich. But he has a Substack following of over 250,000 people.
Mhm.
So it's like
Maybe.
what you're talking about is taking up the air in the room, right? With
Right.
it's what should be independent has now been, the space has been invaded, um, and so on. So I hear you. But I'll just say that the problem of media is key to our movement, and we just lost Emmanuel, but how we get that, command the space. And maybe I'm just getting an intuition that trust, that there needs to be some kind of, well, there is trust. I mean, we follow people, we read them. If they make sense, we start to trust them, right? I mean, and I think our independent media, I guess, needs to introduce the question of, do you trust, and then build this network of trustworthy, um, independent media, get and then see if this media can articulate some shared imperatives, some shared values for a real movement, liberation. I mean, I think we're doomed. Not doomed. We're not doomed. I reject that. I feel
There's
possible.
always a hope. There's
There's
always a
always
hope.
hope, and we have to live for that. But I think our movement needs to describe that hope, and people like Catherine Austin Fitts, I consider kind of the financial, right wing, but libertarian, and her conclusion, given the immense power of the plutocracy, the ruling class, whatever you want to call it, is the local empowerment, and that's a democracy movement, and so our movement needs to articulate that imperative for that, and we need to explore, just to kind of reemphasize being engaged locally and doing stuff that's meaningful. So, but making sport out of going to that Tuesday night city council meeting and taking your 2 minutes and doing it with others in a concerted, um, messaging that would communicate, hey, where our society is in a state of emergency. The COVID program was a big lie, and we want a holistic healthcare. We want truth on 9/11. We want justice, and so on. And we can make these demands, and these are presented as resolutions. But um, you know, but then there's the practical issue of solving the homelessness problem, repairing nature. So that's why I think somehow our movement needs to, well, right now everyone's in silos, right? I mean, people have their passion, they pursue their thing, but what I'm interested in Green Liberty articulating as having a liberation coalition as its mission, a vision for the better society, which is freedom, ecology, and justice. And there is, and it necessarily means that this super rich plutocratic power structure needs to be removed, and how that gets removed is almost inconceivable to me. But it's conceivable if we envision cities as empowered, authentic democracies taking care of everyone, being mutual aid associations, showing solidarity. And again, I think in the future, if this liberation movement goes, there would be a kind of bifurcated economy where there's a free market, and um, and then there's the commons, the shared society, and that's our healthcare, our education, our road and travel, our food productions. That these are all that the cities become responsible. The cities know which fields their crops are coming from, and all of this. I mean, and it's all doable, especially since we all have AI on our side,
All
we
right.
can make a very good society is what I'm advancing.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what Emanuel was saying about elections in Germany stopped because of fascism. And we're kind of on that moment right now with this government shutdown going on longer than ever.
That's
So
interesting.
it's very uncertain to know what the future is and what Trump's plan is when he says he's going to, run for a third term. And Republicans, I think the reason that they hate the mail-in ballots is not because mail-in ballots are a bad thing and they don't work. It's because they do work and everybody gets to vote. Whereas before, a lot of the southern states, people would stand in line for 8 hours because there's only a few voting machines in that precinct. And they stock a lot of voting machines in the more affluent areas, so there's not really big lines. But the idea is voter suppression, and that becomes harder to do when you have mail-in ballots and people have 2 weeks to do that. But right now,
In Oregon, the Republican Party activists are advancing an amendment, a change to our law that would abolish mail-in voting. And Oregon was the first state in the country to adopt it entirely. So you just stopped going on Tuesday into your local school to vote in person, and it was all by mail. And as a consequence of that, the Republican power declined significantly because and so as to what Mark's getting at.
Right. Well, exactly. They're they can't control things the way they did because it was a long time ago. There was some Republican that said, we don't, can't remember who it was, back in 1980 says that there's all these good Christian Republicans that think everybody should vote. These good Christians that think, he says in reality, that's not the case. It's our, our voting power goes up when less people vote, basically. And they win elections when less people vote.
Right.
And to one point I saw in the chat is there's our politics in this country describes the Democratic Party as the left, and it's really not. And I would even go as further to say that the Democratic Socialists of America is essentially an organization that's not like a political party. It actually operates inside the Democratic Party. Its organization doesn't have an independent politics. I mean, or political, excuse me, it doesn't have it's not a political party. It's an organization. So it doesn't really operate outside the Democratic Party. And to what Kshama Sawant said, was that the Democratic Party is the graveyard of movements. And I think, in a lot of ways she's been proven to be correct, and hopefully that's not the case with Mandani, and he may well be, but I don't think you were ever going to get elected to mayor of New York if you were going to run as an independent is probably what the reality really is. And so he is, as Emanuel put this article in there, that his transition team is some far right Democratic operatives. It was an article in the World Socialist website, and I don't know why he picked those people. I mean, maybe just they're simply because they know how to do paperwork. I'm not, or maybe he's really.
It could have been with the strings attached. If he took in millions of dollars of campaign finance from the billionaire class, then it follows that the billionaire would say, I want my money to be, secured by the agency of these people that are experienced and are my political friends. So in other words, the DNC or the Democratic Party said to Soros, who gave the money for Mamdani's campaign, these are the people that will help you, and so on. And so he employs them. I mean, I expect that's what we're witnessing here. The question is, I expect I expect two things. I expect that he's going to be undermined, and that whatever he can accomplish isn't going to significantly transform New York City in any which way. Because
Right.
there isn't a clear vision for what that transformation would look like. All he has so far is we'll tax the rich and we will create, free, and I hate the word free, frankly, but free bus rides, more rent controlled, more affordability or whatever.
Well,
And whatever the third one, those grocery stores.
well,
And
there was
childcare.
free childcare, but what I should say is under the city council, it can't really raise taxes as much as people might think it can. That's got to be done by the state. What happened under Bill de Blasio, I guess there was 3 rent freezes. So the city council can impose rent freezes. But as far as, to pay for the free bus ride and stuff, I guess they can cut the budget of the NYPD, which is completely bloated. I don't know that he will, because he's still keeping on the Commissioner Tisch. At this point, he said he was. But the other way, and it's been pointed out, even though I don't think New York City could do it, is you could have a transaction tax on stock transactions. You could have it be like 1/100 of 1% of it. And you
exactly.
could pay for all kinds of stuff.
And well, in any case, so we'll see what comes of that. Now, we should invite Amanda if she wanted to share a reflection on anything she's heard. You're welcome to. Otherwise, you would have to unmute to do that. But if you don't unmute, then we understand that you're happy to post to the
Or
chat.
if you want to type it into the comments, we can.
Yeah,
read it.
there's
Try to reply.
basically I'm reading. Yeah, there's neither left nor right in the political, the Democrats, the Republicans. There's right and far right, and then elections aren't the answer, but they can be a component of the movements that bring visibility. By bringing visibility, Bernie started a movement in many ways when he ran in 2016. Mandani too, but they can't change the system from within by themselves without a movement outside government, and that's true with I think with Bernie. He had a huge movement behind him, and that's really why when the Democratic Party cheated Bernie, you ended up with Trump. You ended up with Trump because of the fact that they completely cheated the Democratic Party.
Well, I think that's a good.
Excuse me, Bernie. Go ahead.
Amanda's comment there, I think, is a good starting place for not a new discussion, just taking this a slightly step forward. I think all of us can articulate what we would like to see happen if we had our druthers. I think the important question is how realistically do we go about doing it? Because we're kind of in a catch-22 where if we want to get money out of politics or we want to go to some publicly funded election expenditure kind of thing, if we want to close down super PACs, if we want to get rid of change all of the stuff that disenfranchises people and instead gives people more, empowers them because they can see that they are actually, I think that is, Chuck, how you create a movement. The opposite of disenfranchisement is empowerment, and you need more than just an I voted sticker. You need to see that what you're doing actually has real world consequences other than you just pulled the lever and you got counted. The things that we want to see changed can only be changed by the people that we need out of there. And it's like, so what?
Well, wait a minute. The thing is when you look at where there has been change, you look at Seattle, for example, was the first city to pass a $15 minimum wage, and a lot of states have raised the minimum wage, for example, where the Fed's still at $7.35 on the federal level. And then 24 states have legalized recreational marijuana, and a lot more. This is through the voters. And this is the thing about states is people actually get to vote on things. Like real democracy where you get to vote on, we got to vote on, what was it, in Oregon, Prop 118 was the people's rebate, was to raise corporate taxes by 3% on corporate earnings over 25 million. So a corporation that made under 25 million wasn't even going to get taxed that 3% increase, just the corporate earnings over that. But the corporation spent a ton of money to defeat that. And of course, people believe that it was, oh, if we vote for this, it's going to be like a sales tax or be a tax increase. They'll just increase prices at the supermarket, for example. Like, but that, that's where you see the real democracy, I think, is on the state and local level, not so much on the federal level. That can't legalize marijuana, can't raise the minimum wage. now they can't even stay open.
Yeah.
They're destroying the government that actually people should like or do like. I mean, we're
But
seeing
Mark, I mean, one of I guess part of my thinking about this is, storytelling and what's the narrative that, and again, I'm talking from the Green Liberty perspective. And so running for office is a big task, but if you use the run for bully pulpit, in other words, to announce and make the demands so that people can rally around you, then you would, at the end of your campaign, have, 30,000 people that voted for you, that then you could, in fact, solicit and continue to tell the story of, getting free from the corporations, building our real democracies, reclaiming and restoring nature, making a society that operates on moral values and not just economic profit imperatives. And so I feel that story needs to be kind of told, and then and that's a foundational piece. And then whether you run for office or lobby the House for passing legislation or work with others to do things locally and immediately, then become tactical relative to the strategy of saying, this is the possibility we stand for. And that possibility is it's a post-capitalist society that, because I have libertarian inclination, I want to speak to that there's going to be property ownership. We're not, that really what we grapple with is the super rich problem.
Well, I don't know if, we were talking about media a little earlier, and now that the independent media doesn't cover enough, but I follow the Gray Zone, and their Substack has this article that says AI drone used in Gaza now surveilling American cities. And I guess that what most people I didn't even realize there was an FAA rule change that allowed, I guess police forces were allowed to own drones, but the drone had to be within sight of the operator. And now they weren't able to fly. They weren't allowed to fly over major city centers, busy crowded areas. And now that's all changed. So now there's thousands of drones, and it's a company that was used by the IDF, Skydeco, that was basically, it sounds like it's linked to Israel. It was it's as far as its founding. And so this is kind of where, I think Mandani has said something that's very powerful, and he's pushed back on politics, because the thing that really got him noticed, as I remember, was there was this question asked of all the mayors if they would, they supported Israel, and they all said, oh, we're going to go visit, I'm going to go on my next trip. I've been there 4 times, I'm going to go. And Mandani said he's not going to go. He's going to stay in New York, and that's who he's working for the people in New York and cares about New York. And then they said, do you support Israel's right to exist? And he says, yes, I support its right to exist as a state with equal rights, which really, so then they said, oh, so he doesn't really support Israel's right to exist, because all these people support Israel's right to exist in our 2 political parties as an apartheid state. And that's the part that never gets said, by out loud is it's,
Well, so that's what's, and you feel hopeful from Donnie for
well, that's a
calling that out.
shift in our politics. And I think it represents a major shift in the direction that people are going. And I think that there is some recognition that things are going to change. And, providing that Trump doesn't do all kinds of horrible things, and he's very close to having us in a war with Venezuela, which could be pretty bad. And that, huge distractions like that, declaring martial law, et cetera. We just saw something from Amanda, and she just typed in here.
Well, so we are recording this, and let's bring the recording to
Hang on, let me just
not
read
an
this.
immediate close, but
Okay.
or kind of a
I-
wrap up, and we could chat a little bit more
Okay.
afterwards. But there,
I'm gonna
go
read
ahead.
this. I hear a lot about the need to focus on local politics, building power there with mutual aid, community support, et cetera. If people could get less dependent on corporations that way, at the end of the day, I see mass boycott and labor strikes that brings power back into the people's hands, being the only way to negotiate with the plutocracy. We need to make them irrelevant or withhold our consumption and labor until we get some concessions. But I hear we need the safety net at the community level to engage in sustained economic withdrawal that builds leverage.
Boy, I give that an amen to Amanda. You nailed it.
Perfectly said, Amanda. Perfectly said.
Yeah. So this is the Green Liberty, meetup, and Emanuel is set up the Center for Truth Politics, and he and I are real strong on, calling out the criminal element from this plutocracy. And I'm active in the Truth Movement with the Truth Action Project, and so Green Liberty is a kind of a fusion sensibility of political truth. In other words, hey, we're being lied to. You've
Right.
killed the president. You've torn down buildings. You've inflicted this COVID on us, and all in the name of national security. And so that doesn't have standing. And I like the way Amanda kind of framed it in that chat, that this class of people that are super powerful have to be removed from society, like society gave up slavery after the Civil War. Now, we didn't remove the rich from power there, and that was kind of the failing of that event. All those people died fighting against slavery, but in the end, it converted into Jim Crow later in 1876 or something. But the point is taking a strong stance against an institutional power structure that is profoundly abusive and is so irresponsible and so corrupt that we the people just cannot abide. And so the way to liberate from them is for us to become empowered in our cities. And this is where the cities become, mutual aid associations, and everyone works. And everyone works, and everyone has something to do. Certainly, machines are, robotized, and a lot of the key industries are essentially turned into a commons. However we think about this, but the billionaire class, I think about I think about this on the lines of zoning them out of existence. Just like a city of Paris says you can't build a skyscraper next to the Notre Dame, then so do we, the people, get to zone how much wealth there is. And we can debate as, okay, can I be a billion? Can I be 100 millionaire? Can I, if I'm really hard, work smart and get some good patents and make some great things, how rich can I get to be? Well,
There should be a cap. Like you hit this number, you won society. You won life. You get, well, society thanks you. You get a farm. You get a gold watch. You can keep playing, but you don't get to accumulate anymore. We don't. I mean, Elon, his shareholders just voted to make him a trillionaire if he meets
Oh
a
God.
that's just so
benchmarks. A
stupid.
trillionaire.
I mean, it's just, so yeah, that's a good point. And one of the other things that that Green Liberty is aligned with is this idea of of democratizing our monetary supply. So there are these immediate transition things. So say someone did run for the Fed, I mean, I imagine that there could be 5, 6 people, independents, who run for the US Senate. And they run on the principle that we're going to, reclaim democracy, restore integrity to our republic, get the money out of politics, but chiefly democratize the money supply so that the banking cartels, because we effectively rent our money from the banking class,
Mhm.
and we have this extraordinary debt, and there's people who are theorizing that the economy and the money supply would be kind of crashed and converted into these Bitcoin type stuff and so on. So again, people are already talking about this. They already have the idea for it. Dennis Kucinich advanced it with his NEED Act. There's also the Georgists who say if we just to convert our land tax and make a conversion there, again, this could be done at the local level. But there are some things that we can present like off the shelf legislation that could disempower this plutocratic super rich class and empower the commons and the communities and start to make transition. And I'm interested in what is our transition from here to there. And I'm an ecologist, lover, nature lover. So Mark is too. So staking out marine reserves, in nature in place for creatures, and making, just restoring, the great forests is an imperative. That should be a value that society advances, and livelihoods would be derived building and restoring and saving and taking care of nature. So
Right.
this is part of what I think we should express and talk about, even in our movement. So, any other thoughts? And then let's
Yeah.
just,
Shane, do you have something to say first?
Uh, no, I think you guys in your own way sort of articulated what I was thinking, that the local level, the closer you are to home, the more influence you've got, the more empowering it is to get involved. When you see success there, it will empower more engagement at the national level where we have such a lack of engagement. It's the federal stuff, the big stuff, the national stuff. That's the sexy stuff. That's what gets everybody riled up. That's
right.
what people want to give their attention to. That's where all the fun debate is and all the good culture war stuff. Um, but it is the local level where we can be a whole lot more effective. And when we see how effective we can be there, we can unite cross city wise and cross state wise to form that coalition like you're talking about. Let's prove to ourselves that we can make a difference at the smaller level, and then we'll kind of like the clans coming together in Braveheart is kind of the way I picture it a little bit.
That's, so this is a good conversation. And
I guess the only place I see that there's going to be a lot of problem is with the amount of surveillance that we're going to be under. Because like this article about the drones, it's saying that 800, this company has contracts now with more than 800 law enforcement and security agencies across the country. So basically, and I guess they did surveillance the No Kings protest, but I mean, that's the point being is that we're living under a constant state of surveillance, which is being used well, we don't know how it's being used, actually.
well, I think how it's being used, Mark, is to constrain our reach. that, as Shane has already observed, the airspace on Substack is being taken up by these mainstream media players and the independent. So somehow we need to articulate that there is a movement and invite people onto platforms that give information about this movement and would give pathways to meet up locally. I mean, I think that's one of the service elements, is, meet your local, um, green libertarians or freedom people or whatever, however people identify and think about themselves. And then imagine if in every city in the country, everyone's speaking having the same conversation about, in Portland, one conversation that we're going to be having is on solving homelessness and the homelessness problem and applying egalitarian values to solve, and which means spending money and building dignity villages, and having jobs for people to do, having an urban agricultural system, having the homeless helping each other be well and get around and or whatever. So this is not a free market answer. But there can be a free market solution within creating intentional villages for people who aren't making it, for whatever reason. And these would be, this is mutual aid. But I think one of the principles that I accept from the radical egalitarians is the socialist credo that everyone works to their best of their ability and gets taken care of to the, as they need. And the fundamental needs are housing and a mail drop and community center and place to start connecting and building agency and being, healthy. And we know a lot of people who are homeless have drug addiction and mental health. And so this is a holistic, service. And people are already doing this to some extent, but there's also this thing called the homeless industrial complex. Say $700 million is spent servicing homelessness, say in San Francisco. Where does that $700 million go? And to a good extent, it's going into service agencies that are servicing the homeless, but the money isn't essentially building a commons of infrastructure and service to sustain the homeless as people with agency. And this is an idea that I'm developing. So we do need to solve the pothole problem in our cities, address brick and mortar issues, but at the same time, I think really indict this plutocracy for their crimes. And
well, I would say there's a historic example of all this happening, and that is you go back to FDR, because he was, well, the robber barons that wanted to assassinate him at one point, but I think he made a deal with them in the end that basically told him that you're going to have to give up some of your wealth if you want to keep most of it, because the country was on the verge of a revolution after the Great Depression, or as a result.
Well, and you cited the Flint strike of the
right, but but I think overall that whole time period, there was a lot of the labor movement going on for decades, and
I think there was a lot of strikes going on during that time.
But we ended up with strong unions. You ended up with a lot of programs. You ended up with Social Security. You ended up with, programs that basically lifted people out of poverty and created the middle class. And then over the past, 50 years or more, especially since Reagan, time of Reagan, it was all, well, you can go back even before that. McCarthyism was basically an assault on the Communist Party, because the Communist Party was critical in the labor movement. And then they went after the communists, the socialists, and the trade unionists to basically undo everything that was done under the New Deal. So what you have is a reverse going back to that era, is what we've seen, and Trump is pushing it back you know, to where he doesn't care.
Yes.
He wants to cut people off food stamps. He doesn't care that they're going to starve. He's completely ruthless. But, you know, ultimately, I think that there's probably billionaires now that are looking at that going like, yeah, you know, maybe we shouldn't be like Elon Musk, that we're going to have to give some of this up if we're going to keep some of it.
That can be one of our demands, Mark. You know, so let's go ahead and end the recording, unless there's one final thought from anyone. Going once, twice. This has been a Green Liberty conversation, and it was hosted by Emanuel and he's the director of the Center for Truth Politics, and he's an ally in doing this work. In fact, he's one of the leaders of it. Okay, so thank you for watching our conversation.